Let's start with the next passage. The history of any major technological or industrial advance is inevitably shadowed by less predictable history of unintended consequences and secondary effects. Okay, and these consequences or secondary effects are called by author externalities. What does it mean? So, author has given you example of Gutenberg who invents printing press, and what happens? Literacy rate rise since people are reading more. Now, what they need, they require spectacles for the first time, which creates a surge of investment in lens making across Europe, which leads to the invention of telescope as well as microscope. So, sometimes those consequences are innocuous ones or even beneficial. So you can see that author wants to say that when someone is inventing something, the later on consequences or the effects, after effects of that particular invention in long run are are very beneficial. So oftentimes the secondary effects seem to be belong to an entirely different sphere of society. So let's check like Willy's career. Okay, this is the name of a person who hits upon the idea of air conditioning. So the technology was primarily intended for industrial use. He decided to make ACs and primarily intended to do what? First motive was what? To use it for industrial use only, ensuring cool, dry air for factories that require low humidity environment. But it touched off one of the largest migration in history of US, enabling rise of metropolitan areas like Phoenix and Las Vegas. Now, what happens? That barely existed when Carrier first started tinkering with the idea of early 1900s. So AC was invented because they wanted to invent AC for industrial purpose, but it has a long journey from that point of invention to uses on a large scale. Now coming to next one, you can see sometimes unintended consequences comes about when consumers use an invention in surprisingly way. So there is another example like Edison thought of his phonograph, which he sometimes called talking machine, would primarily be used to take dictation. But what happens later in innovators discovered much larger audience willing to pay for musical recordings and made descendants of Edison's original invention. Okay, so in other cases, original innovation comes into the world disguised in plaything. For example, animatronic dolls of mid 1700s inspired Jacquard to invent first programmable loom and Charles Babbage to invent first machine that fits the modern definition of computer. So setting a stage for the revolution of programmable technology that would transform the 21st century in countless ways. We live under gathering storm of modern history's most momentous unintended consequence. And what happens? Carbon-based climate change is there. Imagine vast sweep of inventors whose ideas started the industrial revolution, all the entrepreneurs and scientists and hobbyists who had a hand in bringing it about. Line up a thousand of them and ask them what they had been hoping to do with their work. Not one would say that their intent had been to deposit enough carbon in atmosphere to create a greenhouse effect that trapped heat at the surface of the planet, and yet here we are. So, what this para is saying, the author wants to say here hidden inference that we live under gathering storm of modern history's most momentous unintended consequence. So, there in para 1, 2, 3, you have seen all the positive points. When coming to paragraph number 4, you can see that there is a vast sweep of inventors whose idea started industrial revolution. Okay, all the entrepreneurs, scientists, hobbyists who had a hand in bringing it about, everything, and it lined up of them and asked them all what they had been hoping to do with their work. No one would say that their intent had been to deposit enough carbon in atmosphere to create a greenhouse effect. Okay, so this is some negative consequence, but it was not intended, it was unintended. Industrial revolution came, everything happened, but they were not having this complete idea that they will have carbon deposition, greenhouse effect, or trapped heat at the surface of the planet. And yet here we are, and still you can see that we are standing here. Now coming to continuation of this, ethyl, that is leaded fuel or freon belong to the same general class of secondary effect. Innovations whose unintended consequences stem from some kind of waste product, waste byproduct, but the potential health threats of ethyl unleaded fuel were visible in 1920s. For example, long-term effects of atmospheric carbon buildup in early days of industrial revolution. So these were visible in 1920s only, that there are long-term effects. So if you wanted to stop, you can stop there only. Okay, and indeed, chlorofluorocarbons as a forerunner of a kind of threat will most likely to face in coming decades. It becomes increasingly possible for individuals or small groups to create new scientific advances through chemistry, biotech, material science. Okay, so these consequences that reverberate on global scale. So this was known earlier that these things will come. Okay, so what is the hidden entrance? Author wants to say that you were already aware of these consequences, that this will happen in long run. This will happen when after a big consequence of journey is passed by these inventions or these practices or these experiments. So if you wanted to stop all these things, you have stopped there only, or you have think about it there only. So the main central idea is about technological industrial innovation, which leads to unintended consequences. So first three paras are about positive effects, then you talk about secondary effects, some beneficial, some harmful. Inventors typically do not foresee these secondary effects. They can have significant long-term effects in society and the environment. As seen with climate change and harmful byproducts like chlorofluorocarbons, leaded fuels, the passage emphasizes the growing potential for unintended global consequence as technology continues to advance. Okay, so let's look at the questions. We can assume that author would support all of the following views except. What are the views? Let's see. Option number one. It has become far easier for people today to bring out innovation with dire worldwide consequences than it was earlier. Okay, so option number one, you can see in case of large para, as it becomes increasingly possible for individuals or small groups to create new scientific advances. So we can assume that author would support all of the following except, so this is supported by the author because it is mentioned. Second, last para, you can see the emission caused by large scale use of leaded fuel ought to have been addressed earlier than they were. Yes, they were already known. For example, in last paragraph, the author has mentioned you the example of chlorofluorocarbons, forerunner as a forerunner of the kind of threat we will most likely to face in coming decades. Okay, so yes, this is also supported, and you have to find out the accept. So both the options are supported. Let's come to the third option. While technological advances in the past have had innocuous or beneficial outcomes, most recent advances have the potential to become more threatening globally. Now, in first paragraph only, author starts with this line, and innocuous or beneficial things are mentioned, but threatening globally, this is not given. So this is not supported by the passage or the author. So you can take this. Let's take fourth one. The byproducts of related fuel rather than fuel itself were responsible for the buildup of carbon related gases in the atmosphere. So you can see in paragraph number 4, no one would say their intent had been deposit enough carbon in atmosphere, and yeah, there we are. So it started from para 4, but in para 5 unintended consequences of stem from some kind of waste byproduct directly mentioned in case of paragraph number 5. Okay, so this is also supported by the author. So our answer becomes option number 3, because author says which of the following supported except. So in case of this except, answer becomes option number 3. Next question, question number 13. This is very easy question because all the three person inventors are mentioned, Carrier, Babbage and Edison, and you have to give the answer that are mentioned in the passage to illustrate author's point that. Okay, so let's see para 1, para 2. Para 1 mentions about Willis Carrier first started tinkering with the idea, and but then later innovators came like Edison, Charles Babbage, which are mentioned in case of paragraph number 2. Everything is mentioned here. These inventors could not have visualized the eventual impact of their invention on societies. Yes, this is mentioned. See, Edison, the idea of air conditioning. When Willis Carrier hit upon the idea of air conditioning, technology was intended for industrial use. Okay, and it touched the largest migration enabling Phoenix in Las Vegas. So, okay, this is given in case of I say Carrier. Next, Babbage invent first machine fit the modern definition of computer, setting stage for the revolution in programmable technology. Yes, in case of Babbage, it is given. Then, in case of Edison, famously thought his phonograph, which he calls the talking machine, would primarily be used to take dictation. But then later innovators discovered larger audience willing to pay for musical recordings made on details. So yes, this is also mentioned. So option one is mentioned, and it illustrates the author's point. Secondary effect of past inventions mostly resulted in creation of new inventions. See, yes, as a kind of yes, but the question is about mentioning of these three, and these are inventors. So again, option one is better, and we cannot take the secondary effect. These are not actually the secondary effect as well, because once the invention is done, and it are the consequences. Invention typically end up in being used for entirely different purposes than intended ones. Not correct in all the cases. So you can eliminate three also. When I come to option number four, despite the original intention, unintended consequences of their invention are largely beneficial. We cannot say this. So these inventors, as in if you see all the options, only one option, that is option number one, is talking about the term inventors, which is given in the question. Okay. Carrier, Babbage, and Edison. So definitely, if you're in hurry, also you can see option one becomes a perfect choice if you remember para and 1 and 2, that okay, they have done this thing. So their example and author's point come from option number 1. Next one, which of the following best conveys the main point of the first paragraph? So as we have discussed, first paragraph is about history of any major technological or industrial advance inevitably shadowed by less predictable history of unintended consequences, right? And then the Gutenberg press and literacy rate and surge of investment in lens making is given. So first, main point, uh, secondary effects of most major technological advances in the past, especially if they were unintended, have turned out to be beneficial. See, they have given innocuous and even beneficial, and they have talked about secondary effects and consequences. So yes, full impact of technological advances cannot be estimated in the short run, as the ripple effects often extend far beyond the uh, original intent. Entire impact of technological advance should be evaluated by the boost its secondary effects give to generating further technological advances. So, evaluated by the boost cannot be estimated. And it is important to judge an invention not by its immediate outcomes but by holistic impact of the secondary effects. So all these three things are not actually given in case of first paragraph. We're only talking about how they are innocuous or beneficial. So this becomes option number one as our answer. Coming to the next question, author lists all the following examples as externalities or major technological advances except. So externalities meaning what? Okay, so when I talk about this, you have to remember this line, paragraph number one. The history of any major technological or industrial advance is inevitably shadowed by less predictable history of unintended consequences, secondary effects. And these consequences or secondary effects are known as externalities by author. Okay, so let's check. First one, extension of, because this is an except question. So we will first check how are these, what are the example of externalities, and then the whichever is not the example will have an answer, because except question is there. Extension of the phonograph to large scale recording of music. So in case of option 1, paragraph 3 mentions Edison's invention of phonograph. Okay, so this is given as an externality. Built up of chlorofluorocarbon in the atmosphere. Chlorofluorocarbon is given in paragraph number 6. Reasonable to see CFCs. So yes, this is also mentioned as externalities. Phonograph talking machine was invented, right? And when it came further, it in other cases original invention comes what disguised plaything. So okay, so he invented something, and consequences and secondary effects were more beneficial in that case. In case of chlorofluorocarbon, forerunner of a threat for coming decades. Cooling and dehumidifying factories to air conditioning. So you can see in this particular case, Will's career when hit upon the idea of AC air conditioning. Technology was primarily intended for what? Industrial use, ensuring cool air. This. So air conditioning was invented for this thing. So invention of AC was this. So this is not an externality. This is the main intention of making this particular invention. Okay. So this is not an externality. Application of Jacquard looms to modern IT programming. Yes, Jacquard loom in first para only inspired to invent first programmable loom. Yes, so it is also externality. So question is except. So our answer becomes this one because AC was not externality. This was the real motive of invention. Sorry. Okay, so our answer becomes option number 3. Okay.